The distress call came through at 3:47 hours, fractured by static and the unmistakable percussion of gunfire. Major Kieran Voss had been flying supply runs for 6 months, her C-130 Hercules lumbering through night skis like a faithful workhorse, utterly unremarkable. The kind of pilot whose name appeared on manifests but never in briefing rooms. She'd grown accustomed to the dismissive nods from fighter jocks, the way conversations died when she entered the mess hall. Once she'd flown A-10 Warthogs in the Kandahar Valley, earned 3 air medals, put ordnance on targets with surgical precision. Then came the incident nobody would explain in full sentences, just fragments whispered behind closed doors. Mechanical failure, they said. Catastrophic systems malfunction. 17 Marines waited 4 hours for close air support that never arrived because her aircraft turned into a gliding brick at 9,000 feet. She'd brought it down in a dry riverbed, walked away without a scratch but the gilt-carved trenches in her sleep. They offered her cargo runs or a desk. She chose the sky, even if it meant hauling MREs instead of firing 30 rounds. Tonight's flight was routine, pathetically so. Bagram to forward operating base Mongoose, medical supplies and ammunition, back before sunrise. Her co-pilot, Lieutenant Marcus Webb, was filing his nails when the radio exploded with panic. Any station, this is Dagger 2-3. We are taking effective fire from multiple positions. 6 wounded, medevac request urgent, coordinates to follow. The transmission dissolved into a scream of interference. Webb dropped the file. Voss's hand was already on the throttle. Dagger 2-3, this is Anvil 7-0, say your position. Silence. Then another voice, younger, shaking. Anvil Dagger is compromised. We're in a valley, 30 kilometers west of Kandahar, surrounded. They're coming through the wire. The coordinates burned into Voss's mind before they finished transmitting. She knew that valley. Every ridge, every shadow. She'd nearly died there. Anvil 7-0, you are cargo transport, RTB immediately, the tower commanded. Return to base. Safe, predictable. Voss looked at Webb. His eyes were wide, waiting. She remembered the Marines in that briefing photo, young faces clustered around a flag. Remembered the weight of delivering their personal effects to grieving families because she couldn't deliver bombs when they needed her most. Her jaw tightened. Negative, tower. Anvil 7-0 is diverting to provide emergency support. The radio erupted in protests, regulations, threats. She switched frequencies. Behind them in the cargo bay sat something nobody planned for, something left over from a canceled mission, something that shouldn't have been there at all. An A-10 Thunderbolt II, engines cold, weapons hot, strapped down like a caged predator. And Kieran Voss suddenly remembered exactly who she used to be. The Hercules banked hard, throwing Webb against his harness. Voss's hands moved across instruments with muscle memory, calculating descent angles, fuel reserves, the impossible mathematics of what she was about to attempt. You're insane, Webb said, but he was already pulling up approach charts. They grounded you from attack aircraft for a reason. She didn't answer because he was right, and because it didn't matter anymore. Below, darkness swallowed Afghanistan's mountains, but she could see it all in her mind, terrain mapped from 100 previous missions. The A-10 in the cargo bay was supposed to go to Kandahar for maintenance, a dead-stick ride, no pilot assigned. Fate or coincidence, Voss didn't care which. She keyed the intercom. Loadmaster, I need the cargo ramped down and restraints released in 3 minutes. Ma'am, that's against 3 minutes, Chief, not a request. The Hercules shuddered as she pushed it harder, airspeed climbing into the yellow arc. Standard procedure meant nothing now. Somewhere ahead, Marines were dying. The tower was screaming at her, threatening court-martial, but she'd already switched off that frequency. Webb stared at his instruments. Even if you get that Warthog started, you can't take off from inside a moving transport. Physics doesn't work that way. Voss smiled, thin and cold. I know. The C-130's cargo ramp groaned open at 8,000 feet, wind howling into the bay like a living thing. The A-10 sat there, 33,000 pounds of titanium and fury, designed to take punishment and return it tenfold. Its GAU-8 Avenger cannon, the 7-barrel monster that fired depleted uranium rounds, jutted from the nose like an accusation. Voss put the Hercules into a shallow dive, trimming it perfectly level. "You're actually doing this," Webb whispered. She thought about those Marines, pictured them huddled behind whatever cover remained, ammunition running low, hearing footsteps getting closer. Thought about the 17 she'd failed before. "Hold her steady," she said, and unbuckled. The cargo bay was chaos incarnate, wind tearing at everything loose, the A-10 straining against its final restraint. The loadmaster, Chief Ramirez, looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had. "Release on my mark," Voss shouted over the wind. She climbed into the A-10's cockpit, hands finding familiar switches in the dark. The ejection seat harness clicked home. Battery power first, then the APU auxiliary power unit spooling up with a high whine that fought against the wind. The instruments flickered to life, ghostly green. She'd flown this aircraft type for 4 years, could start it blindfolded. Master arm off, throttles closed, fuel pumps on. The turbofans were designed for ground start, not aerial deployment, but the APU gave her electricity, and electricity meant she could try. "Release," she commanded. Ramirez pulled the pin. The A-10 rolled backward, slowly at first, then faster as gravity remembered it. Webb's voice crackled in her helmet. "Kieran, don't." The Warthog dropped into darkness, and for 3 seconds Kieran Voss was falling in an unpowered attack jet, the ground somewhere below, invisible and patient. She throttled up both engines simultaneously, against every startup protocol ever written. Jet fuel ignited in the combustion chambers without pre-rotation, a brutal, dangerous shortcut that could destroy the turbines or save her life. The engines coughed, screamed, caught. Thrust built. The A-10 stopped falling and started flying, nose dropping as she fought for airspeed. "Tower, this is Reaper 9-1. I am airborne and proceeding to Dagger's coordinates." She used her old call sign, the one they'd stripped away. The radio stayed silent for 5 seconds. Then, "Reaper, you are unauthorized, illegal, and absolutely not cleared for." She switched frequencies again, dialing in the ground team's channel. "Dagger 2-3, Reaper 9-1 inbound your position, 8 mics out, say type of enemy contact." The response was immediate, breathless. "Reaper, we've got dismounts, at least 40 fighters, technical vehicles with heavy weapons. They're massing for final assault." "Roger Dagger, I'm carrying full combat load. Mark your position with infrared strobe." The A-10 was a ground attack aircraft, built during the Cold War to kill Soviet tanks, designed to fly low and slow and absorb punishment that would obliterate anything else. Its cockpit sat in a titanium bathtub, armor thick enough to stop 23 rounds. The cannon carried 1,100 rounds of ammunition. Voss checked her weapons panel. 2 Maverick missiles, 4 high-explosive rockets, the gun. Enough. The valley appeared below exactly as she remembered. Narrow, steep walls, a dry riverbed cutting through the center. The firebase was a collection of sandbags in desperation, muzzle flashes sparking around its perimeter like angry fireflies. She saw the strobe, a pulsing infrared heartbeat visible only through her night vision. The enemy was closing from 3 sides, small arms fire, RPGs trailing smoke. "Dagger, Reaper has visual. Stay low, danger close." She rolled inverted, pulled through, lined up her first gun run. The targeting reticle drifted across enemy positions. Her thumb found the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger fired, and the night tore open. 70 rounds per second, each one the size of a beer bottle, impacting at nearly 3,000 feet per second. The sound reached the ground a heartbeat after the destruction, a mechanical roar that people called the BRRRT, a noise that meant salvation if you were friendly and obliteration if you weren't. The first gun run carved a line across enemy positions, bodies and equipment disintegrating. Voss pulled up, banking hard, already setting up her next pass. Good hits, they're breaking contact on the east side." The voice on the radio was exultant. She didn't celebrate. This was mathematics, angles and velocities, death reduced to geometry. Second run, different angle, she pickled off a Maverick missile at a technical truck mounting a heavy machine gun. The missile seeker locked, tracked, connected. The truck vanished in an orange fireball that painted the valley walls. "Reaper, they're trying to flank north." She saw them. A group moving through rocks thinking darkness was cover. The A-10 wasn't fast or graceful, but it was patient and thorough. She rolled in again, the cannon spitting fire, rounds walking across terrain in a deadly stitching pattern. Return fire sparked up, tracers reaching for her, but the Warthog absorbed hits that would cripple any other aircraft. A round punched through her left aileron, barely noticed. Another hit the engine cowling, ricocheted away. She fired the rockets in pairs, high-explosive warheads converting enemy positions into craters. Dagger 2-3 Reaper, give me battle damage assessment. Reaper, enemy is withdrawing, we count maybe 15 still moving, you broke their assault. 15, still too many. Voss checked her fuel, her ammunition counter. The gun had 400 rounds remaining. Dawn was creeping over the mountains, turning the sky from black to deep blue. She should return to base, face the consequences. Instead, she turned back toward the valley. Reaper, you don't have to. They need to know, Voss interrupted, that this fire base is protected, that we don't abandon people. She made 3 more passes, methodical, precise, hunting the remaining fighters until they scattered into caves and crevices where even her cannon couldn't reach. The A-10 climbed out of the valley as the sun broke the horizon, golden light catching on her damaged wing. The radio crackled. Reaper 9-1, Kandahar Tower, you are ordered to land immediately upon arrival. She didn't acknowledge. Below, the fire base was secure, Marines moving in the open, waving at her. She waggled her wings in response, a pilot's salute. The flight back was silent except for engine noise and wind through the holes in her airframe. Webb's Hercules was orbiting Kandahar, waiting. You saved them, he said on the radio. I was late, Voss replied, again. You weren't late, you were exactly when they needed you. She thought about that, watching fuel gauges drop, the aircraft shaking slightly from damage. Maybe he was right. Maybe timing was about showing up when it mattered most, not when regulations said you should. The landing was smooth despite the damage, touchdown gentle, the rolling out like it had done this 1,000 times. Ground crews stared as she taxied in, this unauthorized aircraft piloted by a cargo pilot who'd stolen it from her own transport. MPs were waiting and officers with stern faces. Voss shut down the engines, completed her checklist, removed her helmet. Her hands were steady. She'd done this before, the waiting, the consequences. The canopy opened and she climbed down to find a colonel standing there, arms crossed. Major Voss, you just committed about 15 violations of military law, she nodded. Yes, sir. Stolen aircraft. Borrowed, sir. Endangered your crew. They're fine, sir. The colonel's face was unreadable. Behind him, ground crews were examining the A-10, counting bullet holes, shaking their heads in amazement. 17 hits, ma'am, one called out. You flew this thing back with 17 hits. The colonel's expression shifted slightly. The Marines at Fob Mongoose are alive because of you. Sir, they're alive because I was in the right place with the right aircraft. No, the colonel said quietly. They're alive because you were willing to risk everything. He handed her a radio transcript. She read it, words from Dagger 2-3's team leader describing the attack, the hopelessness, the moment they heard the Warthog's guns. He says you saved 23 lives. Voss's throat tightened. 23. More than the 17 she'd failed before. Maybe not redemption, but something close. I need to ground you, the colonel continued. Pending investigation, evaluation, probably a hearing. I understand. But off the record, Major, I'm glad you forgot how to follow orders tonight. He walked away, leaving her standing beside the damaged aircraft. The sun was fully up now, heat already building. Voss placed her hand on the A-10's fuselage, feeling bullet scars under her palm. Thank you, she whispered to the machine. Around her, the base was waking up, another day beginning. Somewhere 23 Marines were eating breakfast, cleaning weapons, writing letters home. They were alive. The investigation took 3 weeks, a blur of depositions and technical reviews and long silences in empty rooms. They asked her everything. Why she diverted, how she started the A-10 midair, what she was thinking. She told them the truth, all of it, including the part about the 17 Marines she'd failed before. The panel of officers listened without expression. Major Voss, the presiding colonel said, what you did was dangerous, unauthorized, and completely against protocol. She nodded, accepting it. It was also, he continued, exactly what a combat pilot should do when lives are at stake. The room shifted. Other officers were nodding. Your previous incident, he said, reading from a file. 17 casualties because your aircraft malfunctioned during close air support. Yes, sir. According to this engineering report, which was classified at the time, your A-10's hydraulic system suffered catastrophic failure due to a manufacturing defect. 5 other aircraft from the same production batch were grounded. You had maybe 10 seconds of control before everything locked up. Voss felt something crack inside her chest. I didn't know that, sir. It was deemed too sensitive to disclose. Manufacturing defect, contractor liability, easier to blame pilot error without actually blaming you officially. The colonel closed the file. You've been carrying guilt for something that wasn't your fault, and 3 weeks ago you proved exactly what kind of pilot you are. Sir, the kind who starts an attack jet in midair and flies it through enemy fire to save people. The kind we need. He stood, and the rest of the panel stood with him. Major Voss, you are hereby reinstated to full flight status for A-10 operations. Your call sign Reaper is restored to active roster, and you're being recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross. The room was spinning slightly. You thought we'd court-martial you. Major, the only reason we're not putting you in front of cameras is because explaining how you airdropped yourself in a warthog would compromise operational security. She left the hearing room in a daze, found Webb waiting in the corridor. He grinned. Told you physics would work out. That's not how physics works. No, but it's how you work. He handed her a folder. These came for you, letters from the Marines at Fob Mongoose. Voss opened the folder, saw handwritten notes, photos, a hand-drawn picture of an A-10 with Our Angel written beneath it. Her vision blurred. They want to meet you, Webb said. Ceremony next month, they're awarding unit citations. She nodded, unable to speak. That night she walked out to the flight line where the A-10 sat in rows, deadly and patient. Her aircraft, the one with 17 bullet holes, had been repaired and repainted. Someone had added a small inscription below the cockpit. Reaper 91, Thunderstorm. She climbed up, sat in the cockpit without starting anything, just feeling the space around her. This was where she belonged. Not in cargo transport. Not behind a desk, but here, in this titanium bathtub, ready to bring violence on behalf of people who needed it. The months that followed became legendary, though nobody spoke about it in official channels. Major Kieran Voss flew mission after mission, her A-10 becoming a fixture in the most dangerous valleys of Afghanistan. The call sign Reaper took on mythic status among ground troops, a name whispered with reverence and relief. She was the pilot who would come when others turned back, who would fly through weather and fire and impossible odds. The fighter jocks stopped dismissing her. They started asking for advice. The ceremony was held at Bagram, full dress uniforms and flags snapping in the wind. The 23 Marines from Fob Mongoose stood in formation, and when Voss walked across the tarmac toward them, they saluted in unison. Their commander, Captain James Hooper, stepped forward. Major Voss, on behalf of Dagger Company, we want to thank you for your life. You don't need to thank me, she said. Yes, ma'am, we do. Because you came when nobody else would, when regulations said turn back, when the smart play was to save yourself. He handed her a small wooden box. Inside was a challenge coin, custom-made, showing an A-10 diving through storm clouds. On the reverse, Reaper 91 never forgot. Voss held it, feeling the weight of metal and meaning. I was late once before, she said quietly. I won't be late again. You weren't late that night, Hooper replied. You were exactly on time. The ceremony continued, medals and speeches, but Voss barely heard them. She kept looking at the coin, at the faces of the Marines, at the sky above where weather was building into afternoon thunderheads. Later, she flew back to Kandahar, her A-10 slicing through those same thunderheads, turbulence shaking the aircraft, lightning splitting the clouds. She flew through it all, steady and sure, thinking about timing and second chances and the mathematics of redemption. Below, convoys moved through dangerous roads, knowing that if things went wrong, Reaper would come. Above, the storm closed in, and Kieran Voss flew into it without hesitation, exactly like she'd done 3 weeks ago. exactly like she'd do every day until they grounded her permanently. The war eventually ended, or at least the official part of it did. Voss rotated home with 3 distinguished flying crosses, 2 Bronze Stars, and 17 confirmed close air support missions, where she'd operated in conditions that should have killed her. The A-10 community welcomed her back like she'd never left, like the gap between her first tour and her resurrection had never existed. She instructed new pilots at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, teaching them not just to fly the Warthog but to understand what it meant to be the last hope for people on the ground. "This aircraft," she told them in the briefing room, "is ugly and slow and old. The Air Force has tried to retire it 40 times. But there is no aircraft in the world that ground troops love more because it was designed with one purpose, to protect them." The students listened, scribbling notes. "When you're flying close air support," she continued, "you're not just delivering ordnance. You're delivering hope. You're telling people that they're not alone, that someone is watching, that help is always coming." One student raised her hand. "Ma'am, they say you started an A-10 midair during a cargo flight. Is that true?" Voss smiled. "What I did was violate numerous regulations and get very lucky. Don't try it." "But you do it again." The room went quiet. Voss thought about that night, the decision point, the moment when she chose between following orders and following conscience. "Yes," she said simply, "I'd do it again." After class, she walked out to the flight line where dozens of A-10s sat, the entire 355th Wing inventory. These aircraft were being phased out, replaced by faster, stealthier jets that looked better in procurement presentations. But they were still here, still flying, still protecting, because sometimes the old ways worked best. Her phone buzzed. A message from Captain Hooper, now Major Hooper, commanding a unit in the Middle East. "Reaper, we need you. Things are heating up again. Come back." She looked at the message, at the aircraft, at the sky. She wasn't young anymore, had gray threading through her hair, scars from ejections and hard landings. But she could still fly, could still put rounds on target, could still be there when someone needed her. Voss typed her response. "Send coordinates, I'm on my way." 6 months later, she was back in theater, older, wiser, carrying the weight of experience and the lightness of purpose. The A-10 she flew was the same one from that night, kept in service specifically for her, the Thunderstorm inscription still visible below the cockpit. New pilots asked to fly with her to learn from her, but she usually flew alone. The Warthog was a single-seat aircraft, after all, just the pilot and the mission and the trust of people on the ground. She flew through dust storms and heat shimmers, through darkness and dawn, through every weather pattern the desert could throw at her. And whenever the call came, whenever someone was in trouble and needed fire from above, Reaper 91 was there. Not always first, not always flashy, but always there. Always steady, always willing to fly into the storm. Years passed, compressed into flight hours and mission reports. Voss became a legend without trying, her name spoken among ground troops with the same reverence as Medal of Honor recipients. But she didn't think of herself as legendary. She thought of herself as a pilot doing a job, showing up when called, leaving when finished. The Air Force finally, officially tried to retire the A-10 fleet, and this time they almost succeeded. Voss was 46 years old, a lieutenant colonel, eligible for retirement with full benefits. The morning they held the decommissioning ceremony at Davis-Monthan, she stood among dozens of other Warthog pilots, watching as aircraft were towed into the boneyard, lined up in neat rows to await scrapping or storage. Her aircraft, the one with 17 bullet holes that had been repaired and flown for another decade, sat among them. She'd flown it for the last time yesterday, a sunset flight over the Arizona desert, thinking about all the missions, all the close calls, all the lives. The ceremony was somber, speeches about progress and modernization and the future, but Voss noticed something. Among the distinguished guests were a dozen men in Marine Corps dress blues, veterans of FOB Mongoose, including Major Hooper. They'd come to pay respects not to an aircraft but to an era. After the ceremony, Hooper approached her. He was older too, scars of his own, the weight of command in his eyes. "Colonel Voss." "James, you didn't have to come all this way." "Yes, ma'am, I did." We all did, he gestured to the other Marines, because that aircraft saved our lives and you were the one flying it. They walked together to her A-10, the one being decommissioned. The Thunderstorm inscription faded but still readable. Voss placed her hand on the fuselage one last time, feeling bullet scars that maintenance had never quite smoothed out. 17 hits, she said. I counted. And you flew her home anyway. She flew herself, I just steered. Hooper smiled. That's not how the story goes. How does the story go? The way we tell it, a cargo pilot heard a distress call and decided regulations were suggestions. Dropped an A-10 out of a C-130 at 8,000 feet, started at midair, flew into a valley where 40 fighters were overrunning our position, and proceeded to single-handedly break their assault with the most accurate gun runs anyone had ever seen. Voss shook her head. That's embellished. Maybe, but it's also true. And because of that night, 23 Marines lived. Several of us have kids now, families, careers, lives that wouldn't exist if you'd followed orders. She felt tears threatening but held them back. I was just doing my job. No, ma'am, you were doing more than your job. You were proving that courage isn't about following rules, it's about doing what's right when it matters most. The sun was setting, painting the boneyard in shades of gold and amber. Rows of A-10s stretched toward the horizon, aircraft that had served for decades, that had protected countless lives, now being put to rest. Voss thought about legacy, about what they left behind. Not just aircraft, but the memory of what they represented. That night, the veterans from FOB Mongoose held a small gathering at a local bar, and they insisted Voss attend. She normally avoided such things, uncomfortable with attention, but something about this felt right. They told stories, laughed, remembered the fear and the relief and the sound of the GAU-8 cannon that meant everything would be okay. We need to tell you something, Hooper said as the night grew late. Some of us have kids who are enlisting, going into the military. When they ask us why, when they ask what service means, we tell them about you. You shouldn't, Voss said. I'm not special. That's exactly why we tell them, because you are special, but not in the way that's unreachable. You're special because you're human, because you felt fear and guilt and doubt and you still chose to act. That's what service is. One of the younger Marines, a corporal named Davis who'd been 19 during the FOB Mongoose fight, spoke up. Ma'am, I named my daughter Kieran, after you. Voss's breath caught. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to, so that when she's old enough to understand, I can tell her she's named after the pilot who saved her dad's life. And maybe she'll grow up knowing that courage looks like showing up when it's hard. The conversation continued, but Voss was somewhere else, thinking about names and legacy and the ripples that spread from single decisions. She'd made one choice one night to divert from a cargo run and steal an aircraft and fly into danger. And from that choice came 23 lives, and those lives created families, and those families would carry the memory forward. Maybe that was what immortality looked like. Not statues or history books, but stories told in bars, names given to children, the knowledge that once upon a time someone cared enough to break every rule. Later, driving back to base, Voss passed the boneyard where her A-10 sat among the others. She pulled over, got out, walked to the fence. The aircraft looked peaceful in moonlight, finally at rest after years of violence and protection. She'd never been sentimental about machines, but this one had been her partner through the most important moments of her career. Thank you, she said to it, to the darkness, to whatever was listening. For getting me there, for getting me back, for being exactly what we needed. The wind picked up, desert air warm and dry, carrying the scent of creosote and distance. Above, stars emerged in impossible numbers, the sky vast and indifferent and beautiful. Voss thought about the first time she'd flown, young and terrified and exhilarated, thinking that the sky was freedom. She'd been wrong. The sky wasn't freedom. The sky was responsibility. It was trust. It was the space between people in danger and people coming to help. And she'd spent 20 years occupying that space, being the connection, the bridge, the answer to prayers spoken in desperate whispers. She wasn't sure what came next, what retired pilots did with all the adrenaline and purpose that suddenly had no outlet. But she knew this. Somewhere right now, a pilot was flying an A-10 through darkness, responding to a distress call, setting up a gun run, being what someone needed. The aircraft might be retiring, but the mission continued. Different planes, same purpose: protect, serve, show up. Voss got back in her car, took one last look at the boneyard, and drove away. Behind her, the A-10 stood in silent rows, guardians retired but never forgot, their legacy living in every life they'd saved, every story they'd created, every child named after the pilots who flew them into storms. She was just a cargo pilot once, dismissed and doubted and nearly broken by guilt. But on one night she'd made a choice that proved everyone wrong. And in the years that followed, she'd become exactly what the sky needed. Not a legend, not a hero. Just someone who showed up when it mattered, who flew through storms without hesitation, who proved that redemption was measured in lives saved and promises kept. And that, Voss thought as she drove into the desert night, was enough.